In the cold, hard world of New York City's prisons, survival is a daily battle. During the early 1990s, Rikers Island was a dangerous place, a concrete jungle ruled by powerful gangs. The Latin Kings were the dominant force, a well-organized and ruthless group that controlled much of the prison yard. They were strong, united, and they made the rules. For black inmates, this was a constant threat. They faced daily pressure, violence, and intimidation. They needed a way to protect themselves, to stand together against a common enemy. The need for a new power was growing stronger every day, like a fire waiting for a spark. This dangerous environment gave birth to something new, something powerful. A man named OG MACK, a black inmate, saw the need for unity. He decided to create a new family, a brotherhood that would stand up to the Latin Kings. He brought together other inmates who were tired of being victims. They called themselves the United Blood Nation, or the UBN. Their goal was simple: to protect their members and fight back against the gangs that oppressed them. The Bloods were not just a gang. They were a movement born from a desire for respect and safety within the prison walls. The color red became their symbol. It was a sign of their blood, their loyalty, and their willingness to fight. The UBN created a strict set of rules and a clear hierarchy. Every member had a role, and loyalty was the most important rule of all. They built their strength on the idea brotherly love overrides oppression and destruction, and one for all. This new gang quickly grew in numbers and in power. The balance of power inside Rikers Island began to shift. The creation of the Bloods was a direct response to the Latin gangs, a new chapter in the violent story of New York's prison system. The conflict was immediate and brutal. The Bloods and the Latin Kings clashed in violent confrontations. The prison yards became battlegrounds where old scores were settled and new rivalries were forged. The UBN was created to fight Latino gangs, and this mission was at the very core of its identity. It was a war for control, for respect, and for survival. This initial conflict defined the United Blood Nation for years to come. It was a foundation built on opposition, a brotherhood forged in the fires of a prison war that would soon spill onto the streets of New York and beyond. Into this world of conflict and loyalty walked a young man named Pedro Gutierrez. He was of Spanish descent, which made his story unusual from the very beginning. The Bloods were formed to fight against Latino gangs, so a Spanish member rising through the ranks was not something you would expect. But Gutierrez was different. He was smart, he was tough, and he was ambitious. He earned the nickname Inferno because of the fire and intensity he brought to everything he did. He also went by the names Light and Inferno, each name representing a different side of his complex personality. Gutierrez did not just join the gang, he quickly began to climb its ladder of power. His Spanish heritage, which could have been a barrier, became a unique part of his identity within the UBN. He proved his loyalty time and time again, showing that his commitment to the Bloods was stronger than any ethnic line. He was a natural leader, and other members started to look up to him. He understood the rules of the street and the politics of the prison yard. He knew how to command respect, sometimes through words and other times through force. His reputation grew with every passing year. His rise was a sign of how the gang was changing. The UBN was expanding, and its original mission was becoming more complicated. The lines that were once so clear were now starting to blur. Gutierrez's leadership showed that the gang was willing to look past a member's background if they showed absolute dedication to the cause. He embodied a new kind of blood, one who could navigate the complex world of crime with intelligence and ruthlessness. His journey from a young recruit to a respected leader was fast and impressive, setting the stage for his eventual takeover. Ultimately, Pedro Inferno Gutierrez reached the very top. He became the Spanish chairman of the United Blood Nation, a position of immense power. He was named the Godfather, not just for the UBN, but also for its most notorious subset, the Nine Trey Gangsters. This was an incredible achievement for someone of his background. He was now one of the most powerful gang leaders on the East Coast. From a young man trying to survive, he had become a king, a leader who held the fate of thousands of members in his hands. His rise was complete, but his story was far from over. Pedro Gutierrez's life of crime started early. By the age of 17, he was already deep in the criminal world. His path was set on a collision course with the law, and it wasn't long before his freedom was taken away. In 1996, he was convicted of a very serious crime, second-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to 26 years to life in prison. For most people, a life sentence would be the end of their story, but for Gutierrez, prison was not an end. It was just a different kind of kingdom, and he was determined to rule it. His time behind bars would only make him more powerful. Even in the highly controlled environment of prison, Gutierrez was a force of nature. While he was at Rikers Island waiting for his trial, his violent behavior became legendary. The records show that he was caught with weapons 7 different times. He was a constant danger to other inmates, stabbing or slashing 4 of them during his stay. Prison officials tried to control him by putting him in segregation, a place of total isolation. He spent over 1,000 days in this lonely confinement, but these punishments did not break him. Instead, they added to his fearsome reputation within the gang world. For the next 25 years, Gutierrez lived behind the walls of New York State prisons. He was moved to different facilities, including the Wende Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison. But the bars and the guards could not stop him from running his criminal empire. He was physically locked away, but his influence stretched far beyond the prison gates. He used his time to strengthen his control over the United Blood Nation. He was a king in exile, ruling his vast network from a tiny prison cell. His orders were carried out on the streets as if he were standing there himself. The prison system was supposed to contain him, to remove him from society. Instead, it became the headquarters for his operations. He was a master of communication, finding ways to get his messages to the outside world. He turned his incarceration into an advantage, using his status as a long-term prisoner to solidify his authority. Other gang members saw him as a true leader, someone who lived by the code even while locked away. His long prison sentence did not weaken him, it made him a legend. He was the Godfather behind bars, a testament to the fact that power can thrive in the most unlikely of places. From his small prison cell, Pedro Gutierrez acted like the CEO of a major corporation. The United Blood Nation was his company, and its business was crime. He, along with his top lieutenant, James Baxton, who was known as Groan or Frank White, made all the important decisions. Prosecutors would later describe them as the presidents of the gang. They sat at the top of a strict hierarchy that controlled a massive network. It is estimated that the UBN had between 7,000 and 15,000 members spread across the East Coast, all of whom answered to the leadership of Gutierrez and Baxton. The gang's operations were diverse and highly profitable. They were involved in everything from drug and weapons trafficking to bank fraud. Gutierrez had to approve all major criminal activities. If a set or a local chapter of the gang wanted to carry out a significant crime, they had to get permission from the top. This included violent acts, such as murder. The evidence showed that at least 6 murders were connected to the gang's activities under his command. He also managed the gang's finances, making sure that money flowed up the chain of command. Lower-ranking members were required to pay dues, and this money went directly to Gutierrez and his inner circle. Gutierrez's control was absolute. He maintained his power through a combination of fear and respect. The UBN had a detailed rulebook, and the most important rule was loyalty. Disobeying an order from the Godfather could have deadly consequences. He used letters, coded phone calls, and trusted messengers to communicate his commands from inside Wende Correctional Facility. Cynthia Gilmore, a high-ranking female member known as Lady Bint, acted as a key liaison. She would send him money and pass along his instructions to members on the outside, ensuring his criminal enterprise ran smoothly. His power was not limited to New York. He had final authority over the gang's activities all along the East Coast, including a strong presence in North Carolina. The federal investigation that would eventually bring him down was based in Charlotte, showing just how far his influence reached. He was a master organizer, running a complex and dangerous organization from hundreds of miles away, all while under the constant watch of prison guards. For years, Pedro Gutierrez was the unseen hand guiding a vast criminal network, a true CEO of crime who built an empire from a prison cell. In the world of the United Blood Nation, there was, one rule that stood above all others. You do not talk to the police. The rule of silence was absolute. Anyone who broke this rule was considered a traitor. The punishment for being an informant was, well, death. A person who cooperated with law enforcement was marked as food and put on a worldwide menu. This meant that any blood member anywhere in the world had permission to kill them. This code of silence was, honestly, the glue that held the organization together. It protected the members and ensured that the gang's secrets remained safe. However, this sacred rule had been broken before. and by the most important person in the gang's history. OG Mack, the founder of the UBN, the man who created the Brotherhood at Rikers Island, eventually betrayed his own creation. After being arrested, he chose to cooperate with the government. He became an informant, turning against the very people he had sworn to protect. This was a deep wound for the UBN. The father of the gang had abandoned his children. It was a betrayal that shook the organization to its core and set a dangerous precedent for the future. Years later, history would repeat itself in the most dramatic way possible. In 2017, a massive federal investigation led to the arrest of 83 UBN members, including the gang's highest leaders. Pedro Gutierrez, the powerful Godfather, was at the center of the case. He was facing a trial for racketeering conspiracy, with a sentence that could keep him in prison for the rest of his life. The government had a strong case against him. Faced with this overwhelming pressure, Gutierrez made a shocking decision. He decided to follow in the footsteps of OG Mack. Pedro Inferno Gutierrez, the chairman of the council, the man who demanded absolute loyalty, became an informant. He agreed to testify against the United Blood Nation. The Godfather turned on his own family. This was the ultimate act of betrayal. He knew the gang's deepest secrets, its structure, its members, and its crimes. His testimony would be a devastating weapon for the prosecution. The man who once ordered hits on informants was now about to become one himself. The great betrayal was complete, and the UBN would never be the same again. The story of the United Blood Nation is honestly filled with irony. The gang was originally formed by African American inmates to protect themselves from powerful Latino gangs like the Latin Kings. It was, a brotherhood built on a shared struggle against a specific enemy. The lines were clearly drawn. For years, this founding principle guided the UBN. But as the gang grew, it began to change. It expanded its reach and its membership. The organization started to welcome members from different backgrounds, including the very group it was created to fight against. This decision to allow Spanish and Latino members into the gang, and even into its highest leadership positions, is seen by some as the beginning of the end. The rise of Pedro Gutierrez, a man of Spanish descent, to the position of Godfather, is the perfect example of this shift. While he was a powerful and effective leader for many years, his ultimate betrayal created a powerful argument. The argument is that by moving away from its original identity, the UBN opened the door to its own destruction. The gang lost sight of its founding purpose, and this made it vulnerable. The two most significant betrayals in the gang's history came from two very different men who shared one thing in common. They were not the traditional members the gang was built on. OG Mack, the founder, was African American, but his decision to become an informant showed that even the creator could turn his back on his creation. Then came Pedro Gutierrez. His betrayal was perhaps even more damaging because it reinforced the idea that allowing outsiders into the inner circle was a fatal mistake. It seemed to prove that the old battle lines still mattered. This internal conflict created a deep crack in the gang's foundation. How could the members trust their leaders when both the founder and his most powerful successor had turned against them? The loyalty that was once the bedrock of the UBN was now shattered. The decision to embrace diversity, which could have been a strength, was now being viewed as a weakness. The argument was simple and powerful. The gang was strongest when it stuck to its roots, and it began to fall apart when it let the enemy in. This narrative of betrayal from within would haunt the UBN forever. In May of 2018, the city of Charlotte, North Carolina, became the stage for a monumental legal battle. Pedro Gutierrez, James Baxton, and Cynthia Gilmore stood trial in a federal courtroom. They were charged under the RICO Act, a powerful law designed to take down large criminal organizations. The prosecution aimed to prove that the UBN was a racketeering enterprise and that Gutierrez was its kingpin. The stakes were incredibly high. A conviction meant a sentence of 20 years to life in prison, a final end to their reign of power. The trial was the culmination of years of investigation. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence to the jury. They wanted to show how Gutierrez ran his empire from behind bars. One of the most powerful pieces of evidence was a collection of letters he had sent from prison. In these letters, he gave direct orders, discussed gang business, and managed his criminal network. The jury also heard recorded conversations. An FBI confidential informant had secretly recorded his discussions with gang members, capturing the inner workings of the UBN on tape. These recordings provided a direct window into their world, and the voice of the Godfather was a constant presence. Law enforcement officers and experts on gang culture also testified. They explained the UBN's strict hierarchy, its secret codes, and its violent rules. They painted a picture of a sophisticated criminal organization with Gutierrez at its head. The evidence was designed to leave no doubt in the minds of the jury. The prosecutors argued that Gutierrez and Baxton were the CEOs who made all the decisions, while Gilmore acted as their trusted agent on the outside, moving money and messages. The case was built piece by piece, creating a detailed portrait of a criminal empire. The defense attorneys fought back hard. They attacked the credibility of the government's key witnesses, especially the confidential informant. They pointed out that the informant had his own criminal history. They argued that he had stolen money from the government and continued to sell drugs even while he was supposed to be cooperating with the FBI. The defense tried to convince the jury that the government's witnesses were unreliable liars who were only testifying to save themselves. The courtroom was filled with tension as the two sides battled over the truth, with the fate of a Godfather hanging in the balance. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when Pedro Gutierrez himself decided to speak. But he was not speaking in his own defense. He was speaking as a witness for the government. The Godfather, the man who had lived by the code of silence for decades, took the stand to testify against his own gang. His words carried immense weight. He knew everything, every rule, every secret handshake, every member's nickname, and every crime they had committed. His testimony was a guided tour through the dark world of the United Blood Nation. Gutierrez explained the gang's structure in detail. He described the hierarchy, from the lows on the street to the highs and generals who ran the sets. He confirmed that he was the chairman of the council, the ultimate authority. He admitted to ordering criminal activities and collecting dues from members across the country. His testimony confirmed everything the prosecution had been trying to prove. It was a confession from the very top of the organization. The man who once enforced the rules was now explaining them to a jury, helping the government tear down the empire he had helped build. His decision to cooperate sent shockwaves through the gang world. For the UBN, it was a catastrophe. The betrayal by OG MACK had been a major blow, but this was different. Gutierrez had been the active, reigning leader for years. He was not a distant founder, he was the current king. His testimony provided prosecutors with an insider's guide to the gang's operations. It led to guilty pleas from other high-ranking members like Omari Rosero, also known as Uno B, who chose to avoid a trial after seeing the strength of the government's case. The weight of Gutierrez's words was, honestly, crushing. They sealed the fate of his co-defendants and crippled the gang's leadership. The defense's attempts to discredit other informants seemed weak in comparison to the direct testimony of the Godfather himself. He was the star witness in the government's case against the UBN. His betrayal demonstrated a simple, brutal truth. In the face of a lifetime in prison, even the strongest codes of loyalty can be broken. Pedro Gutierrez's words were the final weapon used to bring down his own house. The consequences of the betrayals by OG MACK and Pedro Gutierrez were devastating for the United Blood Nation. An organization built on trust and loyalty cannot survive when its leaders become its biggest enemies. The trial in Charlotte was more than just a legal victory for the government, it was a mortal wound to the gang itself. With its top leaders either in prison for life or cooperating with the authorities, the UBN's command structure was shattered. The head of the snake had been cut off, leaving the body to wither and die. The gang, once a unified and powerful force, became fractured and disorganized. Members on the street were left without direction. Trust was replaced by paranoia. Who could they look up to when their founder and their godfather had both turned informant? The story of Gutierrez's betrayal spread quickly, creating chaos and infighting. The very foundation of the gang, the idea of a brotherhood that would protect its own, was exposed as a lie. The UBN's reputation was destroyed, not by a rival gang, but from within. The fall of Pedro Gutierrez serves as a powerful lesson. It shows that no criminal organization is invincible. The same ambition and intelligence that allowed Gutierrez to rise to the top also led him to make a calculated decision to save himself at the expense of everyone else. The gang's willingness to welcome a Spanish leader, once seen as a sign of its evolution, was now remembered as a critical mistake that enabled the final fatal betrayal. The internal weaknesses of the UBN proved to be far more dangerous than any external threat. Today, the United Blood Nation still exists, but it is a shadow of its former self. It is a house divided, haunted by the ghosts of its fallen leaders. The story of Pedro Inferno Gutierrez is a cautionary tale of power, ambition, and betrayal. He rose from the streets to become a king, ruled an empire from a prison cell, and then personally oversaw its destruction. The fire that earned him his name ultimately consumed the very organization he led. The House of Blood, built on a promise of unity, fell because of the disloyalty of the men who sat on its throne.